forgot to turn on my mic. All right, well, mic is on. Hopefully, I'm being heard here. Don Ann, what's going on? Good to see you in the stream. All right. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? My audio should be coming in pretty clear now. Yeah, I know. Okay, oh, you said, yes, okay, gotcha, you can hear me now. All right. Well, welcome to the Thursday night YouTube live stream officially. This is the first of many. Basically leading off with everybody's favorite topic, or many people's favorite topic, which is obesity as a chronic illness and the misdiagnosis of obesity, right? So obesity, people generally view it as being overweight, right? So not everybody who has to lose weight is obese. By the numbers, scientifically speaking, obesity is 30% and above when it comes to body fat, right? That is the general diagnosis there, right? So for men, a good healthy body fat percentage is anywhere from 6 to 10%, or 12 or 14%. But once you start getting over that 14%, now it's time to lose some weight. But if you're a man who is now 30% body fat, that's a tad bit too much, right? For women, it's going to be also around that 30% mark, but ideally for a woman, you should be anywhere between 16 and 20% body fat. 25% is fine. That's probably normally what you find among your average woman who's at a healthy weight, right? 25% body fat. Once you start getting to like 30, 35, 40%, this is where you're now in obesity territory. So when I talk about the misdiagnosis of the problem, what I'm really referring to is not accurately describing what the cause of the problem is. It's not like you become 50 pounds, 75 pounds, 100 pounds overweight because you just got a habit of eating one too many calories, right? It's not really necessarily how that works. So there's a very big difference between someone who needs to lose 5, 10, 15 pounds, maybe even 20 pounds. Now, if you gain like an extra 15 or 20 pounds or something like that, you know, from eating too much, that's plausible, right? Too many late night snacks, you know, one too many scoops of ice cream, a bad snacking habit on potato chips or something like that, maybe, then sure. But when you are now 50 pounds overweight, 75, 100 plus pounds overweight is a fundamentally different thing. And it being a fundamentally different thing is where things go sideways for a lot of people, because you cannot calorie cut your way out of obesity to the point where if you've got to lose 100 pounds, you're just going to go straight beeline down to your goal weight. It's not really how it works. So by the math, if we go by the math, when you hear people say calories in, calories out, right? Oh, if you want to lose weight, just eat less calories, right? Calories in, calories out, that's all it's about. I really can't stress enough how much that's not really true, right? It's true to a degree, but not quite. And I'll give you an example as to why. Now, if you are, let's say you're a woman, you're 230 or 260 pounds, and you're 5'3" or 5'4", or something along those lines, and you eat 1,800 calories a day, and just not budging on the scale, not losing any weight, feeling exhausted and fatigued all the time, And you're even exercising, right? You're going for walks, you're doing resistance training, you got a gym membership, you go at least 3 times a week. Still no weight loss, right? You're doing an hour of cardio a day. Now, if it was calories in, calories out, and that's what your weight is, you'd be burning no lower than 2,000 calories a day, right? So I can guarantee you that you're burning at least more than 2,000 calories a day. So if you are aggressively cutting your calories, you are super determined to lose weight. So now you're eating 1,600 calories, 1,400 calories, and all of this type of stuff, and just struggling to lose weight. This in and of itself is evidence that it's not really calories in, calories out. Now you can have a person say, oh, well, you're just overestimating how much you're eating. It's easy to tell somebody that, right? But now that's where your claim of calories in, calories out becomes unfalsifiable. Right? It's like, well, it's calories in, calories out because it's calories out, calories in, right? It's this tautology. But the thing is that human beings are not just thermogenic. And before I get into that, here's the thing to really understand. There is no such thing as calories in. We don't eat calories. We eat food that has a caloric value, meaning that if you apply a certain amount of thermogenic energy to a food, that food will then be broken down, right? And consumed by the flames of that thermogenesis, right? But a calorie is a measure of thermogenic energy. It is not a solid piece of mass that you can then ingest. It's not really how it works. So when it comes to creating a deficit, it's not creating a caloric deficit, it's creating a glucose deficit, a glycogen deficit. So chemically speaking, when you consume food, that food is used for energy when a portion of that food is converted into glucose. Glucose, what we call sugar, is the form of energy, the primary form of energy that your body uses in order to basically stay alive, go through all the metabolic processes, right? So when you eat carbohydrates, those carbohydrates break down into glucose. That glucose then gets converted into ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is energy that your cells then use in order to function, right? When you have stored fat, that stored fat also gets converted into a form of glucose, right? To then be converted into energy by your cells. When that glucose is low, that's when your body taps into stored forms of energy like your fat cells, right? And then there's a conversion process of fat getting converted into glucose to then be used for energy, right? That's how that works. So you store glucose in all the cells in your body, right? You store glucose in your muscle tissue, you store glucose in your brain, you store glucose in your liver, all the cells of your body, right? And stored glucose is known as glycogen, right? Now, your muscle mass has glycogen, right? Muscle glycogen. When you contract muscles, that glycogen in the muscle is depleted, right? But before your body taps into that, so like let's say you're sitting here watching the stream, you're not really performing many muscle contractions. So your body's not going to be tapping into the glycogen stored in your muscle tissue to any significant degree because it's not being used. That glycogen is really only burned locally. So your body is mostly running off of liver glycogen, meaning glucose stored in your liver. This is going to become very important to understand fat loss, right? Or dropping body fat. So throughout the day, your body is going to be gradually depleting stored glucose from your liver glycogen. And as your liver glycogen drops, your body then metabolizes fat to then make up the difference, right? Because your blood sugar has to be kept at a certain level. Now, a healthy blood sugar is roughly 90, right? So as far as your fasting glucose, a good fasting glucose score is going to be 90, right? And your body wants to maintain that 90. Right? Now when you eat, it'll go a little bit above 110, 120, 140, somewhere around there, depending on what you eat. But your body tries to maintain an adequate level of blood glucose. Because if your blood glucose drops too low, well, basically, you pass out. Right? Like a type 1 diabetic, if they go too long without glucose, pretty much there's no insulin response, there's no energy conversion, and they can pass out and go into a diabetic coma, right? So, you know, there's that eat a sugar cookie meme that you see in like the movies where like you're watching a movie and there's like a little kid or something like that and they're type 1 diabetic. So they gotta walk around with syringes and whatnot, sugar cookies. Type 2 diabetes is a bit different. It's a metabolic disorder, and I'm gonna get into that later, right? Because there's a spectrum of something called insulin resistance, insulin sensitivity. And this is where the calories in, calories out thing becomes challenged. Because, number one, you don't burn everything you eat. And we know this because you can get congestion of your digestive tract to the point where you can be constipated. And when you're constipated, a lot of the times you're also lethargic, because as the constipation builds up, your energy levels drop, because this forms a choke point in your gut, right? And so when things are slow to move out, things are slow to come in, right? And that energy formation becomes slow. So you know, when you're constipated, you're often lethargic, terrible sleep. There's a whole cascading long line of effects, right? This is all not just calories in, calories out, because you know what? We got to factor in poop out. And if there's no poop out, well, that caloric metabolism is going to be significantly altered. Now, going back to insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance, right? This is a measure of how well your body metabolizes glucose. So when you consume carbohydrates, those carbohydrates are broken down and converted into glucose. Your body has a skill. It's an ability to take that glucose, absorb it, suck it up into your cells, and then use it and convert it into that ATP, right? To power your cells. Now, along with that glucose, there's oxygen absorption, right? So now oxygen comes into play, because not only do you need to be insulin sensitive, meaning being more effective at metabolizing glucose, but you also need oxygen uptake. And this is measured in VO2 max, right? Your VO2 score is a score which basically shows you how oxygen efficient your body is. Now we get into fitness. Now we get into respiration, lung function. Now we get into red blood cell count, things of this nature, right? Now things get a little complicated. Blood oxygen. Understand that you cannot burn fat or anything without oxygen. So now the thing that becomes a primary objective, if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to drop body fat, top three and the most important things, probably the most important thing, is oxygen usage, oxygen uptake, oxygen expenditure. So what are some of the things we commonly hear? Oh, do cardio in order to burn more fat. Why does cardio help you burn more fat? Well, because cardio forces your body to intake more oxygen. Right? So as your heart rate picks up, your metabolism picks up, oxygen intake picks up, oxygen usage picks up. And as oxygen usage picks up, so does oxygen intake. Because if the two don't rise together, and oxygen expenditure rises beyond oxygen intake, you run out of breath and your body forces you to stop or you pass out. So you need to maintain, the same way you need to maintain an adequate blood sugar level, is the same way you need to maintain an adequate amount of blood oxygen. So let's say you go for a walk, and I'm a big fan of walking because walking is the most beneficial, cost-effective, and safest way to burn body fat. Why is that? Well, if you are obese, you have let's say 30, 50, 75, 100 pounds to lose. Once you start going out for a walk, it doesn't really take you very long to get into your target heart rate zone for fat metabolism. Meaning that walking is going to be challenging enough for you where it's going to uptick your metabolism and cause more oxygen intake, which leads to greater fat loss. All right, so that's pretty much how that works. And walking is the safest form of cardio you can do. Right? When you start getting into things like running, well, if you got joint complications, you got arthritis, or you have muscular imbalances, that could be deeply problematic after a while. And frequent running is not really that sustainable to people who are not really that fit. Walking is a lot safer. You're a lot less likely to injure yourself while walking. So if you walk that magical 10,000 steps a day, or you walk, 3 to 5 or 3 to 6 miles a day, right, then you can really start getting things moving on the scale. I haven't even really gotten that deep into the nutrition aspect yet. I'm really just talking about fat metabolism right now and the whole calorie thing. Now, the reason why I bring up oxygen and I bring up glucose is because the walking, that's going to drop your liver glycogen. And as your liver glycogen drops, your body deploys fat, converts that into available glucose to use for energy in combination with the oxygen. If you're very diligent and consistent with this habit, then you can really start reversing obesity. And I say reversing obesity because reversing obesity is reversing chronic illness, because obesity is a chronic illness. It is a metabolic disorder. It's very important to understand it as a metabolic disorder. And the misdiagnosis is when it's not viewed as a metabolic disorder. Okay, so when I said misdiagnosis, that's what I mean, right? It's not properly being diagnosed. You said background getting loud? Let me turn that down a little bit. You said, Coach, can you turn up your volume a little bit over the background sound? Oh. Am I coming through clear now? Am I sounding a lot better now? Turn it down even more? Okay. See, this is the first stream, so I still gotta get my audio levels right. So let's turn that down a little bit more. Make some adjustments. All right. So we'll see how that plays. It's a lot simpler than TikTok, but I'm getting the hang of it here. I'm gonna be sophisticated with these live streams on here now. All right, much better now, right? Okay, good, okay. All right, so where did I leave off at? Oh, by the way, folks, like the stream. Definitely hit the like button, right? Put some likes on the stream. And funnel some folks into here. Right? So we got what? We got 13 of y'all in here. Let's see if we can get some more likes on the stream here. We got 5 likes on the stream. We got 13 viewers, right? Anyways, let me pick back up. Let me get back into the meat and potatoes of this thing. So I mainly touched on the basics of oxygen, glucose. That's the fundamentals. That's the bare bones stuff, the walking. We get that right out of the way before we even talk about nutrition, because the nutrition part is a bit more complicated. So the misdiagnosis, right? Let's pick up there. The misdiagnosis of obesity. It's not just weight loss. So let's do some math. So we're going to get into caloric values of food as far as nutrition. So they say you got to be in a caloric deficit in order to lose weight. Well, the thing is that there is no such thing as being in a caloric deficit. You can be in a glucose deficit. You can be in a glycogen deficit. There is no calorie deficit. That may sound pedantic, but the reason why I'm saying it that way is because we're not trying to burn calories just for the sake of burning. You're always burning calories. Your body is always engaged in some degree of caloric burn. The question is, what are you burning? Are you burning muscle tissue? Are you burning fat? Are you burning glucose? What are you burning? Right? So let's say you are 260 pounds, you're 5'4", okay? Your ideal healthy weight at 5'4" is like 145 pounds, 150, something like that. So you gotta drop 100 plus pounds. Let's say you're like, okay, cool, so I'm gonna eat 1,800 calories a day. Chances are, if you do what I told you to do, you walk your 10,000 steps on a daily basis religiously, and you just focus on eating 1,800 calories a day. I'm going to assume that you're gonna be you're gonna have an average calorie burn per day of, like, let's say 2,600, maybe 2,800, depending on other factors like resistance training, things like that. But let's even it out. Let's say 2,600 calories. So you're eating 1,800 and you're burning 2,600 per day, right? Doing the walking. Okay, cool. That's a pretty steep cut, right? That's 800 calorie deficit right there. So let's do some math here. So 1 pound of fat is 3,500 calories, right? So if you have a caloric deficit of 800 calories per day, and you do that, let's say 7 days a week, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do that 800 multiplied by 7, right? That's going to give us 5,600, okay? So pretty much like close to 2 pounds of weight loss, right? About a couple thousand calories off. But let's say roughly 1.5 pounds a week, if the math is right. That would be what the whole calories in, calories out thing is for people. But the thing is that, okay, cool, so let's say you do that, and you drop from 260 pounds to, let's say, 252. You do that for, let's say 2 weeks or 3 weeks, somewhere along those lines. And let's say you have a really successful 2 to 3 weeks, and you drop down to 252 from 260. But diminishing returns kicks in. Here's where things get interesting, because your metabolism, as you lose weight, your metabolism is going to adjust to your new weight, right? So that 1,800 calories that you were eating, it becomes less effective because your body adjusts to that 1,800 calories. So if it's calories in, calories out, well, as you drop weight, then it would make sense to drop the amount that you eat, right? So let's say you go to 1,700. Not really much of a difference from the 1,800, so you see very marginal results. Let's say you drop to the 1,700, and then eventually, within the next week or so, you drop down from 252 to, let's say, 251, 250, somewhere around there. So you drop 2 pounds and you drop that 1,700, but you're not satisfied with the results, right? Because it's not how it was in those first few weeks. We drop weight real quick. And you want to get things moving a little bit faster, so you drop to the 1,600. Okay, so this is pretty steep now. 1,600, you drop down from 250, and then within a couple weeks or so, you drop down to 246. Let's see, I'm being real generous with that number because it doesn't really quite work that way oftentimes. But let's say you drop down to that 246 with maintaining the 1,600. All right, cool. But now you're seeing diminishing returns again. What do? Let's cut off another couple hundred calories, right? Try to really get things going on the scale again. So you go from 1,600 to 1,400. So now you're eating 1,400 calories a day. Now you're feeling kind of fatigued, right? Because you're eating less protein, you're getting less carbohydrates, you're getting less potassium, less magnesium, less vitamin C, less calcium, less everything, right? Because you're eating less, you're getting less of everything. It's not just less calories, you're getting less micronutrients, less vitamins, less amino acids, less everything. So now you're starting to feel a little tired at that 1,400 calories, and the food cravings kick in, right? Because you were 260 and now you're in the 240s. And your body is going to start fighting you now. It's going to start creating resistance. You're going to start getting hunger cravings, right? You're going to experience that low blood sugar from eating much less and being underfed. it'll eat into your sleep quality a little bit less, because if you're eating less, you're also getting less tryptophan, which means you're also getting less serotonin, which means less melatonin, which is important for quality sleep. But you grind on and you grind through it. You ignore your food cravings, right? But now ignoring your food cravings and feeling exhausted, now it's eating into your mood. Now you're moody, irritated, and whatnot, but you're determined to lose the weight. Even though now your sleep is diminished, you don't sleep as well. So now because you're not sleeping as well, and the weight's not really coming off, and you're frustrated, right? Because now this is starting to get to you mentally. So then you cut to 1,200 calories per day. You see how this ends up. You're now at 1,200 calories a day, and you still got to get down to like that 150. What's this now? Let's see here. So now you got to get down to that 150. But you're still nearly 100 pounds away. You're still like, what, roughly eating, what, 80 pounds away or something like that, right? So even if you get to that 230, you've been eating 1,200 calories a day. Now, the thing is that you're afraid to start eating more again, right? Because you're like, you know what, I'm going to give into some hunger. I'm going to reward myself for all the success I made so far. So then what you do is you give into some food cravings, you start eating again, and then weight goes back up on the scale. So let's say before you were doing well, even though you were fatigued and tired, you hit that 236 or that 234, you got real close to 230, and you reward yourself. And then you go from eating 1,200 calories, and then you eat an extra 4, and then you get to 1,400, right? But then you wake up the next day, you get on the scale, and you realize, oh no, I've gained a few pounds. So then you cut again. When you keep doing that yo-yo thing, what this really does is this damages your relationship with food. Okay, but the thing is if you want to get to 220 and calories in, calories out, well, what do? Do you cut to 1,000? So let's say you cut to 1,000 and you get to 210. Let's be real generous. Let's say you get to 210 at 1,000 calories a day. Well, how do you get below 200? How do you get to 190? Do you eat 800 calories a day? So the thing is how much do you cut? Because as you cut, you get diminishing returns after a while. So you got to keep cutting and cutting as it's dropping down. And this is the vicious cycle. When people tell you calories in, calories out, in theory, that's true, but in practice, it doesn't really quite work that way. And if you don't want to cut your calories, well, that means you have to be more physically active. So maybe you walk more. Maybe instead of doing the 10,000 steps per day, maybe you do 15, 20,000. But then the thing is, if you're cutting calories and doing more exercise, well, now you're burning the rope at both ends. So now you've got less energy, less sleep, and more physical activity, and a lack of recovery. Now, how long can you keep that up before you get injured? So then it's like, oh, well, you know, my knees have been hurting lately, my hands have been hurting lately, I'm not sleeping well, I don't feel well. At what point in time does your mental focus break, and then you stop being disciplined about your diet and you start backtracking and gaining weight back? The thing about obesity is the fact that this happens to at least 75% of obese people who've lost 15, 20, 25 pounds, right? They lose 20 pounds and then they end up gaining back 15, or they lose 20 pounds and sometimes they even gain back 30. So I have a lot of people reach out to me and they say, you know what? I had success with losing weight. I lost 50 pounds before, and then I fell off, and now I gained back the whole 50 pounds plus 10 more pounds. I don't know what to do. You are not a tea kettle. You are not a gas tank, right? A tea kettle, you fill it with water, you put heat under it, the water evaporates, eventually it ends up being empty. But that's not how weight loss works in a person. You can't treat yourself like a tea kettle on the stove. You can't treat yourself like a gas tank. Oh, if I just step on the gas enough, eventually what happens is the tank goes empty. It's not how it works. we have a whole hormonal system. We have a thermogenic system. We have a chemical system. We got a hormonal system. We got an electrical system. We got all of these different types of systems that govern pedantic. Nice. So we have all of these different aspects to our metabolism. So we got to have a more nuanced take. So the thing is that if we go from viewing ourselves as like, oh, we just have fat, but we just got to burn it off, like how you burn off gas in a gas tank. What if we viewed it as a chronic illness? It's a medical condition. It's not just, oh, you just got to eat a few less calories. It's a medical condition. It's a metabolic disorder. It's a chronic illness. Now here's where things get interesting. So the two things, what you eat and when you eat, are equally important. Not all foods are created equal. Not all calories are equal. Not all carbs are equal. Not all fats are equal. Not all proteins are equal. Let's get into, before I even get into nutrition, let's talk about water. Because this is going to lead into nutrition. Let's talk about water. Dehydration is actually a lot more common than you think. Let me drink some of my tea. Dehydration is a lot more common than you think, especially if your diet is low in fiber and high in dietary fat. And people very significantly overestimate the carbohydrate content of their diet. Your standard American diet is majority fat, right? You're eating foods with dairy, right? Butter, cheese, cooking oil, meat, eggs, right? All of these things together, they really add up. Even French fries. People think, oh, French fries, that's a high carbohydrate food. Not really, no. Because they were deep fried in fat. So they're soaked in fat. So French fries are actually a high fat food. Donuts. Oh, it's carbs and sugar. It's actually a high fat food. Pizza. Well, it's got oil, butter, cheese, meat. Fat, 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 and fat. Not really a high carbohydrate food. Even the dough that's made, that the pizza that the pizza has, the dough has dairy in it. The dough has cheese and butter and things in it, right? And so then that also contributes to the fat content. So you got fat in the bread, in the pizza dough, and then you got fat in the cheese on top of the pizza dough, and then you have oil that is fat that makes up the marinara sauce, and then you have the fat in the pepperoni and the sausage and all of that. So you just got fat on top of fat on top of fat on top of fat. It's a high fat food. But it's low fiber. Donuts, low fiber. Pizza, low fiber. French fries, low fiber. Dehydrating. Why are they dehydrating? Fat is inherently hydrophobic. There's a zero-sum game between fat and water. It's like oil and water don't mix, right? That kind of deal. So one of the biggest selling points of a ketogenic diet is, oh, rapid weight loss. Well, the thing is that a lot of the water that you lose on a lot of the weight that you lose on a ketogenic diet is water weight. Because if you cut your carbohydrates enough, you just have fat. Fat don't store much water. So essentially, it dehydrates you. In fact, you'll have bodybuilders, when they prep for a competition, the closer they get to competition day, when they got to go on stage, what they do is they start cutting carbohydrates, right? Because they want to dehydrate. So they start doing more caffeine, and they start cutting carbohydrates. If you're an average working class American and you're under the gun all the time, racing to work, racing to pick up your kids, racing to this obligation and that one. You're living a caffeinated lifestyle with a high fat diet. You got the caffeine dehydrating you, and then you have the fat dehydrating you, and then you have the lack of fiber also contributing to the dehydration. Here's why I'm focusing on dehydration, because what does dehydration do? Dehydration ramps up your blood pressure. So if you've got high blood pressure, well, those are some significant contributors. When you have high blood pressure and you sustain high blood pressure for long enough, you start getting all types of oxidative stress and damage to your entire cardiovascular system. High blood pressure also limits the oxygenation of your blood, because vascular constriction limits the transfer and intake of oxygen in the delivery of that oxygen to your cells. When that high blood pressure is impeding oxygen, guess what else it's impeding? Fat metabolism, because you need optimal oxygen in order to maximize fat metabolism. But if you have chronically inhibited oxygen uptake, you will also end up being obese over time. What else does dehydration do? Dehydration contributes to insulin resistance. You get sludge blood because glucose needs to be met with an adequate amount of hydration, because water facilitates oxygen intake, because oxygen travels through your body in water. So think of like blood plasma, right? Blood plasma largely is just made up of water, and oxygen travels through your blood plasma, right? And so when you have limited blood plasma, you'll also have limited red blood cells and you'll have limited oxygen. Now, if you flood your body with glucose and then you have high blood pressure and you have limited blood plasma, this is going to cause a metabolic imbalance. Okay? That has nothing to do with calories. You can cut your calories all you want, but cutting calories isn't going to fix that issue, because that issue doesn't have anything to do with calories. Because when you drink water, we don't view water as having a caloric value, even though technically water does have a caloric value. It takes a certain level of thermogenic energy in order to vaporize water. But we don't count that as calories. That's why I say we don't eat calories. Because people say, well, water is 0 calories. So when you go to boil water and the water is boiling, we know that there's a specific caloric value that you need in order to bring water to a boil. So why would you assume that water doesn't have a caloric value? Right? It sounds a bit pedantic, but there's a reason why I'm explaining it that way. It's the framing of the issue to help us understand what the issue is, right? It's kind of like viewing gravity as like, oh, gravity is this force that sits on your shoulders and then it causes you to drop. When in actuality is that the planet has a gravitational pull that pulls everything to the surface of the planet. You can either view gravity as just gravity in and of itself that causes things to drop, or you can view it as electromagnetism. Depends on how you view it, but the way that you view it will fundamentally change the way that you engage with the topic. That's why I'm explaining it that way. Let me catch up with y'all in the comments here. We got Donan, Juju, we got Rob tuning into the stream. Dedicated for Life, how you doing? Welcome, good people. All right. So, moving into the next thing. So I talked about blood pressure. Blood sugar kind of leads into blood pressure. So, if you got chronically elevated blood pressure, DM what's going on. Good to see you in here. Folks, like the stream if you haven't done so already. We're gonna try to get my YouTube streaming habits off to a good start here. So blood sugar, insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance, which is what I named earlier on in the stream. So we talk about insulin resistance, then we got pre-diabetes, then we got full-blown type 2 diabetes. Diabetes is very fascinating because essentially diabetes is a metabolic disorder. Not all type 2 diabetics are obese. You got a lot of type 2 diabetics that are actually at a healthy weight. Very interesting, right? So let's talk about blood sugar a little bit. One of the best ways, or the only way really, to reverse diabetes is to improve glucose absorption into your cells. So you have your brain, and your brain is craving glucose, right? The primary driver and source of energy for your brain is glucose, what we call sugar. Your brain pretty much consumes like at least 25% of all the glucose that you consume. If you're aggressively cutting your carbohydrate intake, right, because you're afraid of anything containing sugar, guess what that's going to do to your brain function? And then the more you cut carbs, the more you have to make up for that with fat. Okay, so you make up for that with fat. What kind of fat? Polyunsaturated fat, monounsaturated fat, saturated fat? What kind of fat? What are the fat sources? There is a difference between, and I'm not going to make this whole thing about diabetes, I'm just mentioning it for the sake of argument. But in regards to diabetes, weight loss, managing blood sugar, right? People say, well, you know, you got to avoid carbohydrates in order to keep your blood sugar from spiking, right? Okay, cool. So basically you cut carbohydrates because carbohydrates are viewed to spike insulin because carbohydrates are your primary source of sugar, right? Carbohydrates get converted into sugar, scientifically known as glucose. So in order to avoid blood sugar spikes, you cut carbs. All right. So if you cut carbohydrates, what do you use to make up the difference? Oh, I'll just add more fats. Okay, cool. So you add more fat. The more fat you add, the more dehydrated you get, though. So here's the problem you got. Dehydration contributes to insulin resistance. Increasing insulin resistance pushes you further into diabetes. So now this is where increasing dietary fat beyond a certain point actually backfires. You're no longer treating your diabetes, you're pushing yourself further into it as a result. Okay. Now we got to talk about lipotoxicity. And lipotoxicity exists in anybody who's overweight to a certain degree. People who are fully blown type 2 diabetic, pretty much they have a very prominent form of lipotoxicity, meaning fat that is stored inside cells that are not really supposed to be storing fat. So for example, muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is really only supposed to have like 1% fat storage, very minuscule. You start storing too much fat inside muscle tissue, this leads to lipotoxicity, right? So when you start storing, and it's ectopic fat, meaning lipids that are stored inside your cells, right? So you have ectopic fat built up in muscle tissue, ectopic fat built up inside your heart tissue, liver, pancreas, kidneys, all throughout your body, right? You just start storing all type of ectopic fat in your organs. So these lipids get lodged inside your cells, and then they prevent glucose from getting in. This is the basis for insulin resistance. The more dietary fat you consume, the more risk you create for developing lipotoxicity. So it's already been clinically demonstrated and proven that the consumption of saturated fat is the primary driver of insulin resistance. Right? There's been all type of studies that have been done that shows that you can manually induce insulin resistance with saturated fat. So what's the saturated fat sources? Well, pretty much animal products are going to be the bulk of saturated fat. Now, there's saturated fat in like coconuts and peanuts, things like that, but to a very minuscule degree. The bulk of saturated fat is going to be coming from animal products. Dairy, meat, eggs, things like that. In the populations that have the highest consumption of saturated fat also have the highest instances of type 2 diabetes. The populations that eat the most meat have the highest levels of type 2 diabetes. Very phenomenal. And there's been population studies that show this. Like, for example, in India, as India started increasing meat consumption, we always associate Indians with being vegetarian, but, you know, as a society increases in its economic wealth, they start consuming more meat, right? Animal agriculture starts booming, and it becomes more of a staple, right? Not all Indians are vegetarian, right? But we saw that in India, the populations that consume a lot of the meat, but they do also consume dairy, high instances of obesity and diabetes. China, Hong Kong, right? As the meat consumption in Hong Kong increased, we started to see a prevalence of type 2 diabetes in those populations. Russia, same thing. If you look at the countries with the highest instances of diabetes, with the highest diabetic population, specifically type 2 diabetes, is going to be the United States, India, Russia. Right? That's just population studies, epidemiological data, right? So it's just maps on one-to-one. So pretty much we know what the deal is. Now, you'll have a lot of people that say, well, I thought sugar causes diabetes. There's no evidence that shows that sugar causes diabetes. And it doesn't really make rational sense either, right? That sugar would cause diabetes. Because if sugar would cause diabetes, for example, glucose causing diabetes, well, what's the mechanism for that? Because your body, if sugar is the primary source of energy for the human body, then how do you store enough of it in order to create lipotoxicity? Because lipotoxicity is the thing that is mandatory to create type 2 diabetes. The reason why I'm focused on type 2 diabetes is because when we're dealing with obesity, obesity is a form of lipotoxicity. The only difference is the lipotoxicity is coming in the form of excess fat storage, meaning that your body is storing fat quicker than you're burning it. And the metabolic issue is essentially you're not burning through your blood sugar fast enough to start tapping into your fat cells. All right. That's fundamentally the problem. It's more of a signaling issue. So if that glucose cannot be absorbed into your cells, then it can't be used for energy. Now, if we want to make a glycogen deficit, right? Because we don't need a caloric deficit to lose weight. We need a glycogen deficit. We need a glucose deficit in order to lose weight. Meaning we need our blood sugar to drop low enough. We need our glycogen stores to drop low enough for our body to start tapping into fat cells for energy. That's the goal, right? But in order for that to happen, we actually have to get that glucose in a position for it to be used, which means that glucose has to enter cells in order for it to be used for energy. So what are some of the best things that we can do? Well, cut dietary fat, right? Because it's very difficult to just keep piling on and storing fat if you're getting less of it. Fat is very easy to store in the body. And your body stores fat way longer than it stores carbohydrates. You can deplete all of the stored glycogen in your liver in like 8 hours. If you exercise doing resistance training, it could be 2 to 4 hours. Right? When you drop that liver glycogen low enough, when you drop your muscle glycogen low enough, your body has to rush to start tapping into fat and use that for energy. Your body doesn't really have a difficult time using fat for energy, but you have to be able to drop that blood sugar low enough and drop your liver glycogen low enough for that process to start happening. right? If your blood sugar is really high, your body is not really going to tap into your liver glycogen very much because you have all this blood sugar. You drop your blood sugar, and the glycogen stores drop in your liver, and then that's when that whole process happens. The reason why it can be very difficult for someone who's insulin resistant or type 2 diabetic to lose weight is because they have a difficult time dropping their blood sugar low enough in order to start tapping into fat for energy. This is what's going to stall your weight loss progress. And it doesn't matter how much you cut your calories. Because if you're insulin resistant enough, you can eat a slice of bread and your blood sugar will be elevated for hours. You don't even have to be diabetic really for that to happen, right? You can, let's say, I'm gonna eat 5 small meals a day. Okay, well, let's say meal number 1 raises your blood sugar to 145. Meal number 2 raises your blood sugar also, right? So basically what happens is with meal number 1, if it raises your blood sugar to 145, your blood sugar has to drop enough by the second meal. If your blood sugar doesn't drop fast enough by meal number 2, then it's just going to spike it even further past 145, and then you start getting into like 160s, 170s, etc. And then meal number 3 compounds on that. So you have a compounding rate of blood sugar increases. So more frequent meals isn't necessarily always better. That's why it depends on what you're eating. Before I go into what you're eating, this now leads me into eating schedule. Now, your cells have to open up. Your cells will open up under the right conditions. Cells opening up is referred to as insulin sensitivity, right? That's the process. Your cells have to be receptive to glucose entering in. What are some of the ways to do that? The primary way of doing that is being more active, whether it be resistance training, going for walks, things like that. So let's say you wake up first thing in the morning and you do some stretches, mobility exercises, things like that. That's going to prime your cells to start sucking up and utilizing glucose. This is very important to do because if you wake up first thing in the morning and your blood sugar is 120, 145, 160, whatever the case is, you got to wake up in the morning and start getting mobile. Because you're waking up and your body's incredibly stressed first thing in the morning. And this is especially prominent if you have poor sleep quality. If you have poor sleep quality, chances are you're waking up with elevated blood sugar. Because you have this hormone called cortisol. Cortisol kicks on first thing in the morning, wakes you up out of bed. It's a stress hormone. And your body responds to stress with blood sugar spikes. Your body responds to stress with an increased heart rate. So if you track your resting heart rate, normally your resting heart rate should at least be 60. But if your average resting heart rate is like 70s, 80s, all that type of stuff, you're in a chronic state of oxidative stress and inflammation. Right? So to some degree or another, cortisol is really kicking in and it's driving this stress response. The number one response to stress is getting active. Literally getting active. So when you feel anxiety or things like that, get moving. Deep breathing exercises, stretching, going for a walk, mobility exercises, resistance training, things like that. Get up and do something. Because that stress is a survival mechanism. It's like pulling your hand back from the fire when you feel the burn, right? You gotta respond to it. If you feel the stress and you don't respond to it, you just sit in it, where you get all of this blood sugar flood into your bloodstream, and you're not using it. So it just sits there, elevated, and then you go eat, and you compound that. So you just have your whole day, you just got this excessively elevated blood sugar. And at that point, just simply cutting your calories is not really going to do it, because the thing is that blood sugar is not really being used for energy, it's sitting there. But now if you move, now your cells open up and start receiving that blood sugar, because those cells have a self-preservation mechanism where those cells, they go, oh, we need some energy here. Let's start opening up and taking in some glucose. Right? So you can effectively use exercise to reduce anxiety, to reduce cortisol, to reduce stress. and improve insulin sensitivity in an acute fashion right at that moment. So then after your exercise, you've depleted liver glycogen, you've depleted muscle glycogen, then you go have a meal and you replenish your body. Now we get into what you eat. The foods you eat, it should be medicinal. So your foods should be rich in fiber, vitamin C, antioxidants, water, B vitamins, magnesium, potassium, all of these micronutrients that optimize your nervous system and your metabolic system. Vitamin C is the most common and prevalent antioxidant in your body, right? It is the antioxidant that you get the most of, especially when you're having like a high raw vegan diet like what I advocate for. Eating an abundance of fruits. It's a great first meal. Wake up and have some mango, pineapple, watermelon, or cantaloupe or something like that, right? You flood your body with B vitamins and vitamin C, potassium, and all of this. And all of those things work together to dilate your vascular system. Remember what I said before about high blood pressure and dehydration. If you're eating water-rich foods that are high in antioxidants and potassium and citrulline and things like that, they act as a vasodilator, meaning they expand your vascular system and they facilitate more blood oxygen. Now, what happens when you have more blood oxygen? You get more fat metabolism. What happens when you get vascular dilation? You get a regulated, healthy blood pressure. Doing that habitually is going to significantly improve your metabolism, and that puts you on the right path towards exiting obesity. I didn't say anything about calories just now. This is all about biochemistry. Magnesium. Magnesium is pretty much going to be in all of your plant-based foods. Magnesium is needed in order for your cells to absorb glucose. B vitamins is mandatory. It's needed in order for glucose to be converted into usable energy by your cells. Inside your cells have like this energy factory called mitochondria. Mitochondria is the energy factory. That's where the glucose gets converted into energy. B vitamins are necessary to facilitate that process. Magnesium is necessary to facilitate that process. Potassium is necessary to fulfill that process, right? I didn't say anything about calories just now. Because in order to burn whatever you're eating, well, your metabolism has to be capable of doing it. Then the fiber and the water from the fruits work together to regulate your blood sugar, which means that the sugars from the fruits empty out into your bloodstream at a slower rate. Processed foods with no fiber and a bunch of processed sugar, that stuff hits your bloodstream real quick. Sends your blood sugar through the roof. With the fruit, much different, especially if that fruit is at 55 and below on the glycemic index. The exceptions are the fruits that are a little higher on the glycemic index, like a 60 to an 80, but they have a very low glycemic load, right? And so basically, if it's going to be a food that's higher on the glycemic index, it has to have a lower glycemic load. So if I eat 6 cups of grapes, 6 cups of grapes can be 700 calories roughly, maybe even 800. 6 cups of watermelon, that's like 250, 236, somewhere around there. Fundamentally different caloric values based on the foods. But grapes are lower on the glycemic index, but they have a higher glycemic load as opposed to the watermelon. Now, you can wake up every morning and eat watermelon. Watermelon is great for improving blood flow and improving insulin sensitivity. And you have that watermelon, then right after you finish eating your watermelon, you go and you get your workout in, or you get your walk in. You walk your 10K steps or whatever the case is. Bring that blood sugar back down. So this is just talking about oxygen, water, blood sugar, that kind of thing, and how to manage it. So I talked about the first half of your schedule, your eating schedule. So you wake up, you get active, and then an hour after you wake up, you start eating. It should be an hour to 2 hours after you wake up. That's when you have your first meal. So if you wake up at 6, you should probably have your first meal like 7 or 8. If you wake up at 5, you should probably have your first meal around 6 or 7, something like that, right? let's skip towards the end of your eating schedule. If you really want to maximize and improve your metabolism and blood sugar levels, stop eating 4 to 6 hours before bed. So you start eating an hour or 2 hours after you wake up, and you stop eating 6 to 4 hours before bed. People commonly know this as being intermittent fasting. All you really need typically is an 8 to 10 hour eating window. 6 hours is pretty nice. So what happens is you condense your metabolic and digestive processes into a smaller window, so you spend more time out of your day not digesting and metabolizing glucose, and you can spend more time of your day getting into an ideal blood sugar level, getting closer to a fasted blood sugar level. It's as close to 90 as you can get it, right? So that's where the intermittent fasting thing works its magic. It's not really a weight loss thing. People think, oh yeah, intermittent fasting is great for weight loss. It's not really great for weight loss. It's great for fixing your metabolism. And when you have a better metabolism, that's when the weight can start coming off. So if you are obese and you want to get to a healthy weight, you have to improve your metabolism first. It's not the weight loss that's the first priority. It's the metabolism improvement that's the first priority. It feeds back into the misdiagnosis thing. If you're just trying to lose weight and you're not really focused on improving your metabolism, you're going to struggle. Let's catch up with y'all in the comments here. I do intermittent fasting, wake up at 7 a.m. All right. Folks, like this stream. Let's get some likes up in the stream. Where we at? Let me take a break here. See where we at. We're still at 12. All right, 59 of y'all in here. Well, 19 currently, but there was 59. All right, fair enough. I've been going on for a while now. We're an hour and 16 minutes in. Then again, I got on a little bit earlier, so I'm actually an hour in. So let's pick back up. And watermelon is in season. True. Those of you who follow me on Instagram and TikTok and whatnot, y'all see me eating these fruit bowls. Because basically communicating the message is that those fruit bowls, that is a phenomenal daily habit to have. Fruit is probably the best food that you can possibly eat on a daily basis. Right? So you wake up, you have your watermelon, or your cantaloupe, or your honeydew, your mangoes, or your pineapple, something like that first thing in the morning, and that brings down that cortisol, and it brings down the oxidative stress and inflammation, because inflammation is important to deal with. If you want to lose weight, you better drop the inflammation. If your inflammation too high, it's going to cause vascular constriction, it's going to jump your blood pressure up, and you have high blood pressure, and it's going to lead to elevated, excessive blood sugar. It's going to jam up your metabolism. That's why you want to have the antioxidant-rich diet, which goes back to the fruit, because fruits are very, very heavy at antioxidants. So fruits literally lower your stress in real time. I post like TikTok video, I could just be sitting there eating a bowl of fruit, and the video blow up, take off, all like millions of views, all this type of stuff, likes, everything. People love the video. I'm just sitting there eating a bowl of fruit. Why? Is because on an intuitive level, we see that and we go, oh, we relate in our minds on a biological level. We view fruit as a stress reducer. So if you're a really stressed person and you look at a bowl of fruit, it looks good to you. There's a reason for that. That's a biological imperative right there, especially if you're black, right? However, if I was just sitting there eating a bunch of raw red meat, most of you would be grossed out. Yeah, it's unsee he eating out like that. That looked gross. Right? I'm just sitting there on this chewy, raw meat. It wouldn't have the same reaction. Why? Well, it's because we're not carnivores. We don't have that biological response. Right? Fruit, on the other hand, completely different response. We drink fruit juice, vegetable juice. We ain't drinking meat juice. Right? So getting back to the misdiagnosis, what are people getting wrong about obesity? Dealing with it wrong. If obesity is a chronic illness and then it's being misdiagnosed, the misdiagnosis means you're providing the wrong treatment. The wrong treatment for obesity is calories in, calories out. The wrong treatment is, yo, you got to wake up and grind, lift weights for an hour to an hour and a half in the gym, then do an hour of cardio, and then cut the crap out of your calories. That's how you lose the weight. If that's how you're dealing with obesity, you're in for a very stressful journey. Hello from St. Louis. I didn't think I was going to catch you. What's going on? Yvonne, welcome. Good to see you in here. Oh, too late. Maybe tomorrow. I'll stop 4 to 6 hours before. So, that misdiagnosis and giving the wrong treatment for the issue, that can lead to really bad problems, right? It's kind of like a doctor saying, hey, your thyroid, you have a hypothyroid issue. Seems like your thyroid's not working. Let's remove it. Let's set you up for surgery. Now, what if they removed the thyroid, but your thyroid was fine, but the problem was a fatty liver? Well, now you got a fatty liver and a missing thyroid. This is why the misdiagnosis is such a problem. Misdiagnosing the problem is very dangerous. It's lethal, right? So in order to drop to your healthy weight, we got to deal with the blood pressure, we got to deal with the blood sugar, we got to deal with food choice. So when I talk about a high raw vegan diet, what am I talking about? I'm talking about a diet that's mostly made up of raw fruits and vegetables, with some legumes, maybe some sweet potato, a little bit of quinoa, that kind of thing, right? But it's overwhelmingly going to be fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, right? So your watermelon, your cantaloupe, your honeydew, your pineapple, your apples, your grapes, your grapefruit, your tangerines, kiwi, strawberries, blueberries, bananas, these types of things, right? Cucumbers. And then for your leafy greens, right, we're having bok choy, spinach, cabbage, collards, kale, spring mix, watercress, these types of things, right? Getting that chlorophyll from the leafy greens, getting the omega-3s, the iron, the calcium, right? The magnesium, the manganese, all of these type of things that are necessary to maintain a healthy metabolism. And we need these things in abundance, right? So I talked about schedule, talked about the misdiagnosis and the fundamental problem, and now we can get more into food choice other than what I've just mentioned, which is gut health. Your issues and your obesity is starting with a gut health disorder. That's where you're starting. The longer the gut health disorder goes on, that's when it starts to convert into lipotoxicity, fatty liver, adrenal fatigue, hypothyroidism, high blood pressure, kidney disease. That's like the order of processes, but it starts in your gut microbiome first. You don't fix that, then you're on the path to all the other illnesses I just mentioned. So that's when we start adding in things to our diets: papaya, coconut yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, kombucha, right? Fermented greens, sprouted greens, right? Prebiotic fibers, probiotic cultures in your food. And when you get those fermented foods that I mentioned, oh, miso also, by the way. When you get those fermented foods, make sure you're getting them from the refrigerated aisle. If you're getting it off the shelf room temperature, it's not going to have those probiotic cultures. And probiotics are the healthy bacteria that your gut needs. And then prebiotic fiber is the fiber that your gut flora feeds on. And then as they feed on that fiber, they multiply, they proliferate, and this is how you get a healthy gut. So I've explained the misdiagnosis. I've explained the eating schedule and the nuances of that and the fundamental misconceptions, calories in, calories out, all of that type of stuff. And I'm going to wrap with this. If I had to explain in a minute or less how to reverse obesity, as far as nutrition is concerned, or improving your metabolism, number one, increase blood oxygen. Number two, increase your pH balance in your blood. Okay, so alkalizing your body. And how do you alkalize your body? Magnesium, manganese, calcium, potassium, iron. Getting those things in proportionate amounts, in abundance, that's going to alkalize your body. And that's going to improve oxygenation of your blood, and that's going to improve red blood cell count and the ferritin level in your body. It's very important to know if you're anemic, because if you're anemic, you're also going to have a very difficult time losing weight. Anemia is one of the substrates of metabolic disease. Fixing your gut health, right? Feeding your good gut bacteria with probiotics and prebiotics in order to improve your gut health. This is the way out of things like Crohn's, colitis, diverticulitis, whatever type of IBS, leaky gut syndrome, that type of stuff, right? And that's what a plant-based diet is very good for, especially when it comes to those fermented foods and the digestive enzymes and whatnot that soothe your gut. And then there's fasting. Having an eating schedule. If you don't have any experience with fasting, you've tried it before, maybe you had an extremely difficult time with it, you felt it was a horrible experience, try first establishing a 10-hour eating window on a daily basis, like the one that I mentioned earlier, where basically you start eating 1 to 2 hours after you wake up and you stop eating 6 to 4 hours before bed, right? So you establish a 10-hour eating window, then you move to an 8-hour eating window, then you can move to a 6, and then you can start doing more advanced things like alternate day fasting, where you're eating every other day. I'll talk a little bit more about that on another stream, right? But that's going to be more of a stream that's dedicated to fasting. If you just start working on those things that I just mentioned, that's where you can really start reversing the chronic illness known as obesity. Don't treat it just like weight loss. Treat it like what it is, which is a metabolic disorder. Hello from Jamaica. What's going on? Big shout out to you tuning in from Jamaica. People starting to now y'all starting to funnel in, huh? Should I have started the stream at 9 o'clock, or is 8 o'clock a little too early? What about sickle cell? Oh, I'm probably got to talk a little bit more about sickle cell, because sickle cell is more of a gene mutation kind of thing. That is mainly a thing that's experienced by people of West African descent, right? It's a malformation of red blood cell. That's a bit more of a complicated thing. I've had somebody with red blood cell, with sickle cell, and we were able to make substantial improvements. They had less crisis, more energy, and things like that, and they were really starting to improve over time. Great to see everyone here. True. Any of you new tuning into the stream, definitely give a like to the stream. Hit the like button. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, those things, I'll leave it there. I'm going to be talking more about weight loss tactics and talking a bit more nuanced about that type of stuff. But those are the things mainly I specifically wanted to focus on the misdiagnosis here. All right. Before I move on, what kind of questions do y'all got, right? Because I'm going to move on to the next segment, which is going to be a bit more fun. And then I'm going to wrap. But before I do that, what kind of questions y'all got? 17 people watching. Yeah, not bad, right? We got a little baby stream going on here. So let me know if y'all got any questions before I move on to. I want to do a video review. I got a funny video for y'all today. And I can do the video review here on the stream because it's easier for me to share my screen. And we are going to be dealing with the phenomenal and extraordinary claim: plants are poisonous, vegetables are poisonous, and they're trying to kill you. If you want to know what that's all about, put a 1 in the chat. If you've got questions that you want me to answer, put that in the chat. What's that? No. All right, so we got a 1. We got a 1. We got 2 1s. Are y'all ready? Y'all ready for the are y'all ready for the video review? Are y'all ready? Let me get this set up. Hold on a second. Let me pull it up. Here we go. We're up to 15. Not bad. All right. So let me shift gears a little bit here. All right. So let me know if y'all hear the video when I start playing it. All right. Were y'all hearing that? Let me know if y'all hearing the video. They said no sound. All right, let me see here.
How this changes us metabolically and physically and biologically can cause a lot of harm. But we need to remember as well that there are other chemicals and toxins that exist in the food that we...
Let me know if y'all hear the video playing. Okay, now y'all hear the video playing. Okay, gotcha. All right. So I'm gonna so let me start it over here. Let me start fresh. What's that?
Okay, well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thank you all for having me here. The title of my talk is Plants Are Trying to Kill You, which of course is a very provocative title and is meant to be, but it's trying to make people think about, obviously this community knows full well about the danger of carbohydrates, how this changes us metabolically and physically and biologically, can cause a lot of harm. But we need to remember as well that there are other
Is it too low? Is the It's good? It's good? Okay, cool. So let me start.
Chemicals and toxins that exist in the food that we eat that can also cause harm. So let's take a think about this. Okay, so just Botany 101, plants are living organisms and they like to stay living organisms. If you eat them, they die. And so they have defenses just like any other living organism. And while animals can run away or fight back, plants can't. And so they use a lot of different things, but poison is one of their main deterrents. They use these.
Okay, so let's deal with the first claim here. Now he's gonna make a lot of claims. He makes a lot of claims in this video. Plants, they want to live, so they have poison because they can't run away. This claim assumes that plants have a brain and they have wants and desires because they're sentient like us, right? Plants have goals and ambitions and feelings and emotions and things like that, right? In the same way that we do. At least that's how he's explaining it. Now, the thing is that plants do not have, they don't have a brain, they don't have nociceptors, they don't have the infrastructure that is needed in order for them to be sentient, to have this kind of self-preservation mechanism where they want to ward off predators, right? It's not really that kind of thing. Plants are reactionary. Okay, so maybe that's a bit pedantic, but I figure but I figure I'll lead with that, right? Because it's kind of a funny way to frame it, the way what he's doing there. All right, so let's go on here.
Defense chemicals to poison the animals that are trying to eat them, and they have hundreds of different ones geared towards different animals, insects, and pathogens that are trying to eat them. This is why most plants in the world are inedible. We sort of know this intuitively. If you got lost in the woods here and you ran out of food, you wouldn't be able to eat any random plant. Most of them would make you very sick. I don't think anyone is going to be able to spot the vegetables in this picture, right? So you have to know exactly what to eat, and the reason is because there are these defense chemicals.
Okay, so plants. Oh, I see you, Agnes, in the stream here. There you go. What's going on? Good evening. So plants are trying to kill you, right? And you have to know you can't just go out into the wild and eat whatever, because some plants are poisonous and they can make you very sick or kill you. Now, is he going to distinguish the difference between beneficial plants that are good to eat and plants that are toxic and or poisonous? Let's see if he makes that distinction at all. Just keep in mind if he makes that distinction, or if he just says, oh, all plants are trying to kill you. Let's see if he makes that distinction. He said, look at me, I'm fancy. Yeah, get a little fancy here. Get a little fancy. We got off to a little bit of a rough patch in the beginning here, but I think we're sailing right.
So here are just a few sort of categories of the ways that plants defend themselves. They use lectins. Is something people are gaining more interest in, but there's tons of different kinds of lectins. There's 2,500 different plants use cyanide that we know of. There's different various toxins, phytates, tannins, oxalates, hormone disruptors, nutrient blockers, things that make you very sensitive to light. And nightshades we've known about for thousands of years, and yet for some reason we're still eating these things. So again, just botany, biology 101. I literally learned this in 7th grade, that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them, so that they can survive and thrive. And animals.
Okay, so plants are learning to become more and more poisonous because we're in an arms race, right? It shows the picture. He's like, plants versus animals. So he hasn't made the distinction between which plants are safe to eat and which ones are not. He hasn't done that yet. He's a doctor, by the way, right? Very knowledgeable guy. He's a doctor, so pretty chances are, right, that what he's saying is legit because he's a doctor, right? So we'll see. So he's talking about botany now. That's not really the route that I would go, right? Because we have plants that we grow in our house, like snake plants and things like this. We have ficuses, different types of bushes that we have in our house or in our yard. And then we have plants that we eat. He doesn't seem to be making a distinction between these different types of plants, so his take is a bit crude here, but let's see where he goes with this.
Animals becoming more and more adapted to the specific poisons in specific plants so that they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. And this is where they get their dedicated food resources. It's like koalas and pandas. They eat a very specific diet. They eat other plants. They will get very sick. The way I came to the way of eating that I do, which is really just meat and water, is 22 years ago when I was taking cancer biology at the University of Washington in Seattle. We went over how plants use defense chemicals in order to defend themselves, but we were looking at this from a cancer perspective, so we were looking at carcinogens. And we learned 20 years ago that Brussels sprouts alone had over 136 identified human carcinogens in them, and that just...
So Brussels sprouts, right, they have like over 100 carcinogens in them, right? And carcinogens feed cancer. Carcinogens, very dangerous, right? Carcinogens are cancer-growing agents. So if these Brussels sprouts are loaded with all these carcinogens, then surely he's going to show us scientific data, right? Statistical data that shows an increase in Brussels sprout consumption and rates of cancer. Let's see if he shows us that data, okay? That's the data we're looking for. If Brussels sprouts are carcinogenic and carcinogens cause cancer, and by default, Brussels sprouts must cause cancer. Let's see if he has, let's see what kind of evidence he has to support that.
White cap. I'm telling you, this is why kids. No one likes Brussels sprouts, right? And that's why, right? That bad taste, that bitter taste, is your brain and your tongue, which are sophisticated machines, and they can tell you like, hey, this is bad for you. Spit it out. So if and that's what we would normally naturally do. As a kid, so you give an infant a piece of broccoli, they will hate you for it. You give them a piece of bacon, and their eyes light up, right?
All right, so he's engaging in some critical thought here, right? So you know that you're not supposed to eat something, and your brain is telling you not to eat it if it's bitter. So when something's bitter and we don't like that taste, it means to spit it out, right? So bitter things must be bad for our health. And we know that bitter things are bad for our health because if you feed a child broccoli, they'll hate you for it, right? But if you give a kid a piece of bacon, their eyes light up. So what's the implication? Brussels sprouts are bad because children don't like them, and bacon is good for your health because children like them. Is this the line of reasoning he's using here? I don't know if I would go with that, right? So if you're picking and choosing what is a good food to eat and what is a bad food to eat according to what a child prefers to eat, well, what happens when you give a kid a bag of Jolly Ranchers or, some type of gummy candy? And then the kid is just eating all the gummies and the kid is all super excited to eat the gummies. Are gummies now a health food? And hey, according to him, if you give a child bacon, well, we know children love bacon, therefore bacon must be really good to eat, right? So this is a guy who is a doctor who is making the argument that, well, a food is good for you if a child likes it. That's how I'm interpreting that. Y'all can let me know if I'm misrepresenting what he's implying here, but that seems to be a bit bizarre. But let's see.
So we were learning that white cap mushrooms had over 100 known carcinogens, but also spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, literally given pages and pages of every plant that you've ever come across in the grocery store, and not a single one had less than 60 known human carcinogens in them. They were quite abundant. We have research from Professor Bruce Ames from Berkeley in the
So cucumbers, cancerous, right? All those things that he just mentioned are cancerous. Cucumbers too. He mentioned cucumbers in there. Which ones did he mention? Let me go back here. Let me see.
And not a single one had less than 60 mushrooms, had over 100 known carcinogens, but also spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber.
So spinach, lettuce, cabbage, celery, cucumbers.
Broccoli, literally given pages and pages of every plant that you've ever come across in the grocery store, and not a single one had less than 60 known human carcinogens in them. They were quite abundant. We have research from Professor Bruce Ames from Berkeley.
Wait a minute. So lettuce, spinach, broccoli, cucumbers, celery, they're loaded with carcinogens, and we know carcinogens cause cancer. So he should be able to produce statistical data that demonstrates an increase in cancer rates among increased plant consumption. So for example, we should be able to look at vegans versus non-vegans and see higher rates of cancer among vegans, right? So he's making this claim, it should be very easy for him to produce that statistical data if what he's saying is true. Where's my mouse here?
Berkeley in the 1980s that actually went into this, which we'll go on to in a minute. We were quite taken aback by this, obviously. We were very, very shocked, as some of you may be right now. And I remember thinking in my head, I'm like, well, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And our professor must have just read our minds. He looked at us like, you guys aren't getting this. And he just said, I don't eat salads. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants
Oh,
are trying to kill you.
all right. So salads, plants, he doesn't even let his kids eat them because they're so dangerous. Well, if they are that dangerous, he should be able to provide statistical data showing that. So let's see.
So I was like, right, forget plants. And I just stopped. And you go to the grocery store and everything has plants, right? Everything's either is plants or has plants in the ingredients. And I just walked around and I just came across it's eggs and meat. I'm like, okay, well, so I just eat eggs and meat. And that's what I did for a number of years and had massive health benefits. I was playing professional rugby while in university, and my athletic performance, as well as just my physical health, just increased dramatically. It was just night and day difference. And again, still feeling those positive results 22 years later. So that's the thing, is that most plants will kill most animals. So it's not that some plants are poisonous, some aren't. It's that all plants are poisonous. It's just that certain animals have evolved the ability to defend themselves against specific plants. But if they eat other plants, they will get sick or even die. So you have pandas and koalas, right? They eat a very specific diet. It's very, very monotonous in nature. They don't have this big, broad range.
All right, so he made a big claim. So far, he hasn't provided any statistical data for the claims he's making so far. So now he's moving on to pandas and koalas and kangaroos and things like that. But we're human beings, right? So what does the data say for human beings? I'm still kind of waiting on that data. I don't really want to repeat this like over and over, but it seems kind of long and drawn out. But the reason why I'm doing that is because people make a lot of health claims on the internet. And if you're not really educated in nutrition and you see a guy, well, it was a doctor and he said plants are poisonous. And you know, doctors, they're educated in this stuff and they know what they're talking about. So how do you know whether a doctor is giving you legitimate information? It's like, well, epidemiology is very good data. So statistical data, percentages, ratios, that type of thing, right? If you are going to say that a thing is poisonous when consumed, then we should be able to see higher instances of poisoning and disease among people who eat those things at a higher rate than everybody else. So in order to really substantiate the claim that he's making, well, you're going to really need that data. So, I mean, you can tell us stories about pandas and kangaroos and koalas and stuff, and that's cool, but what does that have to do with me as a human being? Is the evidence, right? I mean, if I'm listening to a doctor tell me about nutrition, I don't want to really hear about the nutritional habits of a koala. I'm not a koala. I'm a human being. So what about human beings, right? You're not implying bacon is a health food, is it? Because bacon is also loaded with carcinogens. Is a carcinogenic food, right? The American Diabetes Association already admitted this. The American Cardio Association, Heart Disease Association, I forgot what the name is. They've already admitted it. All this type of stuff, right? We got the population data on diabetes, cancer rates, things like this. So if I'm wrong, and hey, I'll default to him because he's a doctor and he's at a podium and he's giving a lecture at a podium. This guy is legit, right? Well, we still got to see those receipts. We still got to see that data. So let's see. Maybe he's just being long-winded for the sake of the presentation. Let's see if he gets us that data.
Of things that they eat. They eat very specific things. You know, there's 340,000 species of plant in the world. Koalas eat one. Pandas eat one. Cows, horses, grazing animals eat grasses. And they only eat specific grasses. And then the leaves that a giraffe eats are different from the leaves that a gorilla eats. Those are different from the leaves that a deer eats, and so on. And if you mix those leaves around, they all get sick or die. There are symbiosis between plants and animals. Obviously, this is an evolutionary trend in the ecosystem. You have animals co-evolving with plants. You get all the Great Plains and grasslands who evolved with the big grazing animals. They work together symbiotically. But also, you can look at fruits. We think, well, fruit, the plant wants you to eat them. Like, well, maybe not. They want something to eat them, but not necessarily you, because certain animals, when they ingest these seeds, those seeds will germinate in their intestine, and that will spawn this plant. So a good example of that is cassowary bird here in Australia and elsewhere, and they eat about 150 different berries and fruits.
All right, so this is quite the departure away from talking about human beings. So now he's added a certain type of bird, a cassowary bird in Australia. It's an interesting fact. Apparently plants, they pick and choose which animals they want to eat their fruit. I didn't know that plants were that selective. But me as a human being, well, I want to know, are fruits safe to eat? What does the data say? Let's see if he gets to that data.
And those will all kill you. And they will kill basically any other animal that eats them, because those plants want the cassowary bird to eat them, because those seeds will not germinate if they don't go through a cassowary bird first. And so if the cassowary birds leave an area, those plants and trees will die off. And we have this saying, like, don't eat the red berries. This is something that people knew, identifies like the red berries, like, don't eat those, right? So most fruits are still actually going to be toxic to humans. So this is the study from Professor Bruce Ames from Berkeley. This was published in 1989, and he showed that just the natural plants and vegetables contain 10,000 times more naturally occurring pesticides by weight than the industrial pesticides that we were using on them, and that they were orders of magnitude times more likely to cause cancer than the industrial pesticides, in this case ALAR, which they were looking at specifically. They were trying to actually get it banned, and they were saying, we gotta get rid of this is poison, and it is. Spinach is worse.
So spinach has more pesticides than the pesticide chemicals that are sprayed on the crops, and they're cancerous. Seems like a pretty big claim, right? Spinach is so dangerous because of all the pesticides that is built into spinach. Okay, well, in order to support that claim, what does the data say? I feel like I said that a million times at this point. I'm probably, I'm probably being, I almost feel obnoxious doing this, right? But this is what I'm just really belaboring the point, because this is a repeated pattern among people who make these kinds of claims, right? These fantastical claims. If they're not giving you the scientific data, there's no statistical data behind it, right? It's like, well, I mean, I need to see some receipts, right? So let's see if he gets to it. We are 7 minutes in. He's made a lot of claims within the 7 minutes, but he hasn't supported any of them so far.
So he at that point identified 42 different toxins that existed in just a plethora of different plants, like everything. I mean, in the article you'll see it's just every single plant that would exist in the produce aisle was there, and 42 toxins, 20 of which were shown to be carcinogenic in mice. Fast forward 11 years later, when I took cancer biology, we already know about 136 just in Brussels sprouts. So there's more. So even though we've talked about today about the WHO pushing fake meat and lab meat and all these sorts of things, they still have a page that you can look up that all talks about all the natural poisons that are in plants. And this natural toxins in food, as they call it, does not talk about anything that exists in actual meat, except for the aquatic biotoxins. But this is from algae. The shellfish and fish should eat the algae, and that can make that toxic. But this is why you avoid things that are infested in that area. They talk about all sorts of different.
This is why you avoid things that are infested in that area. What does that mean? So, for example, since he's talking about seafood, well, the keto people and the carnivore people, right? They're like, hey, you got to eat fish for the omega-3 essential fatty acids. Okay. Well, what is omega-3 essential fatty acids made by? What makes it? Oh, well, it's made through photosynthesis in the chloroplasts of plants. Omega-3 essential fatty acids are explicitly made inside plant life, and they're synthesized in the chloroplasts of plants. Chloroplasts, those little green molecules inside plants that, when exposed to sunlight, that's when they create these omega-3 essential fatty acids. But omega-3 essential fatty acids are not made in animals because animals do not have chloroplasts. So in order for animals to get omega-3 essential fatty acids, they have to consume plants. And the salmon consumes the algae. That poisonous algae he was just talking about, that's the infestation. Okay. So now, if he disagrees with my claim, or anybody who was a big proponent of carnivore this and that, and keto this and that, so can I just eat any kind of salmon and get omega-3, or does it have to be this wild caught? Should it be farm raised, or should it be wild caught? They always advocate for wild caught. Well, why not farm raised? What's the difference? It's salmon, right? You told me salmon's a good source of omega-3. So what's the difference between the two? What they don't tell you is the reason why they tell you explicitly wild caught is because the wild caught salmon eat the algae with the chloroplasts in the omega-3 essential fatty acids. But he's saying that, that algae, well, it's poisonous. It's an infestation, right? So now he's a doctor. Does he know where omega-3 essential fatty acids come from? Does he know what chloroplasts are? Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. We'll see.
Different things like cyanides, pyranocoumarins, lectins, solanine, mycotoxins, and much more. And they talk about poisonous mushrooms as well. Think about this. We eat mushrooms, but there are over 10,000 varieties of mushrooms in the world. How many of those don't kill you on the spot or give you a religious experience, right? There's like 5, right? And yet we think that because these 5 don't give us an acute stage reaction of that nature, that not only are they safe, but good for you, which I think is a bold assumption to take with your health.
Okay. Well, what does the data say? If there are no mushrooms that are good for you and mushrooms do not have a health benefit, well, what does the data say? So when people are, touting the health benefits of different types of mushrooms, whether it be king oyster mushrooms, baby bella mushrooms, any really different types of mushrooms, right? Even they got like these mushroom supplements and all of that, right? But he's saying, oh, that's a bold assumption. Well, it may be bold, but is it true? Well, let's see if he presents any data.
See, like the natural toxins can cause a variety of adverse health effects and pose a serious health threat to both humans and livestock. Some of these toxins are extremely potent. These are all things that we eat all the time. They give examples of these things. Adverse health effects can be acute poisoning, ranging from allergic reactions to severe stomach ache and diarrhea, and even death. Long-term consequences include effects on the immune, reproductive, or nervous systems, and also cancer. So, speaking earlier today about the effects of the mitochondria on cancer, all of those carcinogens in plants damage your mitochondria.
All right, so should I go through the whole video like this? Because I don't know if I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. I don't want to omit anything he's saying. But we're 10 minutes in and he hasn't provided any statistical data for the poisonous effects of eating vegetables. He hasn't done that yet. We're 10 minutes in, he hasn't supported any of these claims with any kind of evidence, right? Now, when he talks about these carcinogens, does it matter what the dosage is? So, like, for example, in order for something to be poisonous to the point where it gives you adverse effects, well, it needs to be properly dosed. Did he factor that in? So, for example, if spinach is poisonous and bad for your health, well, surely there has to be a threshold where, like, well, if you eat over a certain amount of it, then it becomes poisonous. So is it a cup of spinach? Is it 2 cups? Is it 3 or 4? Is it 5 or 6? What's the threshold? right? That's kind of important to know because the dosage with anything, right? So for example, he mentioned diarrhea. Vitamin C can give you diarrhea. But the thing is, the dosage has to be high enough in order to induce diarrhea. Now, if I were to say, hey, vitamin C causes diarrhea, technically I'd be correct. But on its face, it's kind of a ridiculous claim to make because if I'm eating apples and apples have a significant amount of vitamin C in it, it doesn't mean that the apple is going to give me diarrhea. But if I now shovel, let's say 6 grams, 8 grams of vitamin C powder into my mouth and swallow it with water, that may induce diarrhea. But there's a fundamental difference between just extracting the vitamin C in the form of ascorbic acid and swallowing large amounts of that to induce diarrhea versus getting vitamin C from a natural food source. You see the difference? Now, the nuance that I just gave you, right? I haven't heard any of this nuance from him yet. So it's kind of odd because he's a doctor. So he should understand things like epidemiology, statistics, dosages, things of this nature, right? He should understand this. He's a doctor. Right? Well, let's see.
So going into some of the specific categories, such as lectins. Lectins are protein that exists in many different plants. They have a bunch of different functions. They actually have lectins in animal meat as well, but they don't seem to cause any harm. Lectins, these are probably developed antipathogenic. They're very old, and so probably against pathogens and insects, but there's obviously a lot of cross-reaction with other forms of life. These are proteins that can bind to carbohydrates, and so they can bind to carbohydrates on the surface of your cells, and this is something that's been researched more and more. Dr. Paul Mason has a really good lecture on just lectins that he's done at a previous Low Carb Down Under venue, and then people like Paul or Dr. Gundry wrote an entire book called The Plant Paradox, talking about how toxic lectins are, and then concluded that you should eat a plant-based diet, which I don't think I would come to that same conclusion. So
Well, hold on, wait a minute. So Dr. Gundry, he's telling you how bad lectins are, but then tells you to eat a plant-based diet, but you wouldn't come to that conclusion. Why not? What does he believe about a plant-based diet that's not true? Seems like that was an opening to explain why he wouldn't come to that conclusion. Now, he just spoke about lectins. Now, what is a lectin? How do you get rid of lectins? Lectins are super dangerous. They're terrible for your health. They bind to stuff, and they're an anti-nutrient, and they're deeply problematic, these lectins, right? Well, lectins are found in things like potatoes and beans and stuff like that, right? Quinoa, all this type of stuff. Well, if you eat these things on a daily basis and you're not getting all type of health disorders, well, why isn't that? How come, like for me, I love eating lentils. Lentils are loaded with toxins, or are loaded with lectins, right? And all these carcinogens and stuff. Now, me as a nutritionist, helping people to reverse chronic illness with all the foods that he's saying is causing cancer, because of how poisonous and carcinogenic they are. Now, if that's true, what he's saying doesn't seem to really match up with reality in and of itself. I need some answers. I'm kind of confused. So this whole thing about lectins, well, what can I do to get rid of these lectins? Can you get rid of lectins? How much lectins do you have to eat in order for them to have negative effects? How is it that people on a plant-based diet are experiencing all of these health benefits from eating all these cancerous, poisonous vegetables and lectins and all of this if they're so bad for your health and they're so toxic and they kill koala bears and stuff? I'm confused. So he's a doctor, so he's really educated and knowledgeable on the topic, so I would assume that he'd be able to really clarify this issue. So let's see if he does. Oh, I got some lag going on. We got the spinning wheel. Let's see. Nene. Who is there speaking? This is Dr. Anthony Chafee. What's going on?
We talk about a lot of carbohydrates here, how that can affect insulin, how hyperinsulinemia can cause all sorts of different problems. But what we don't necessarily know about is that certain lectins can actually bind to your insulin receptors and bind them more tightly than insulin and cause a greater insulinogenic effect. It can also bind to leptin receptors and leptin. So this is leptin is obviously a satiety signal, so it'll release from your adipose tissue and your stretch receptors. When your stomach is full, goes to your brain and says, hey, we're full, we're hungry, or we're not hungry, we don't need to eat, we have enough energy. So you block that.
Well, if that's true, then how come all of the people I'm coaching, how come they're losing weight? How come they're reversing diabetes? I don't understand. Because these lectins and these carbohydrates, you know, they're binding and damaging and constricting your mitochondria and your insulin receptors, and they're just tearing your body up. Now, if that's true, how was Diane reversing her diabetes? How are people just reversing all these chronic illnesses and losing weight and all this and improving their gut health when they follow the diet plan that I put together for them? It was loaded up with all of these poisonous plants. I don't understand. Is it just that everybody who I'm giving a diet plan to, they're superhuman? They're just invincible to plants or something like that? What's going on here? I'm being facetious. I'm saying that a little tongue-in-cheek. But here's the deal about the lectins. Now, the lectin issue is irrelevant because we don't eat raw beans. Right? We don't eat raw lentils. We don't eat raw rice. We don't eat raw potatoes. Right? We don't eat raw rice, raw quinoa, raw peas. We don't eat these things raw. So what does the cooking process have on lectins? He hasn't said yet. Right? So that seems like a pretty important fact for him to conveniently leave out. Maybe he doesn't actually know that much about lectins. Maybe he only is familiar with what lectins do under a microscope in a test tube. In the scientific community, this is known as in vitro, right? Meaning through the looking glass. So lectins get destroyed in any processing. So if, let's say you take beans and you soak them in water. Soaking them in water destroys the lectins. Sprouting them destroys the lectins. Cooking them destroys the lectins. If you soak them and then cook them, that destroys the lectins and makes them safe to eat. This is the case with lentils, beans, any kind of legumes, potatoes, rice, quinoa, kamut, any of these type of things, oats, etc. It's kind of important to know, because he would be correct. These things will kill you if you eat them raw. It's a good thing we don't eat them raw. So this information that he's given us, not really that helpful, because, well, we didn't have a habit of eating these things raw anyway. So he is correct in a test tube. But that doesn't really apply to nutrition, right? Because I don't sit down and have a beautiful, robust plate of lectins, right? I don't write a diet plan and it says, oh, eat a quarter cup of lectins. It's not really how it works. It's not nutrition. What he's talking about is biochemistry, but, you know, very different thing than nutrition. So you have in vitro, and then you have in vivo, meaning, well, what does it look like and what does it do and how does it behave in a test tube? And then what does it look like and what does it do and how does it behave in an actual human being's body? Two very different things, right? Maybe he doesn't know that. Maybe he's he's not very familiar with nutritional science, but he is very familiar with biochemistry, and that's the problem that he's running into. This is why he doesn't have the scientific data. It's because his wheelhouse is biochemistry, but he's very limited on his knowledge in regards to nutrition, right? So that's why, like, you go to a nutritionist for a diet plan, but you don't go to a biochemist for a diet plan. In the same way that if you have a cardiovascular problem, you don't go to a urologist for it. Right? If you have a gut health problem, you don't go to a psychiatrist for it. Two very different fields. But you know, we'll keep going. So that's pretty much the problem that he's running into here.
Block that off, which insulin will do as well, then you're not able to see your satiety signals and you end up overeating and you overeat and you overeat. And this is why we overeat. So this is another reason why people on a ketogenic diet often reduce the amount that they will eat naturally. But sometimes you'll actually see that the lectins are also having an effect. And when you drop those, people will actually lose weight as well. There was a study looking at people with isocaloric intake, and just removed lectins, and they all lost weight, and the others didn't, and it lost a significant amount of weight. It's also...
Oh wait, is he going to show that study? Because he says that isocaloric is isocaloric, right? So the caloric intake among both groups is even, but one group didn't have the lectins and the others did, and the ones with the lectins, they lost the weight. And the ones with the lectins, that they didn't lose weight, and then the ones that removed the lectins, they did lose weight. Well, what did their diet look like? What were the food choices? What were the cooking methods? Were in those groups, what did the people in the groups, did they have chronic illnesses? Were they overweight? Did they have gut health disorders, food allergies? Is he going to go through the methodology of this study? Because it seems like that's kind of important to know. We can't just be like, oh, well, they just removed lectins. Well, the more you cook a food that's high in lectins, the more lectins you remove. So was it like they were all on the same diet, but one ate raw beans and then the other one cooked the beans? What's the deal with that? That's some... I feel like there's a lot of gaps to fill in there. So he was like, there was a study done and it showed this thing. I'm not going to talk about the details of the study, what the name of the study was. I'm not going to give you any percentages or statistical data. I'm not going to tell you about any of the pre-existing conditions or the makeup of the groups. I'm not going to give you any of that information. I'm just going to make this I'm just going to give you just the broad-based kind of convenient facts that I'm telling you here. And then you can just take from it what you will. What's the point of bringing up the study? Now, the thing is that now he was able to recall that study offhand. And the study that he's recalling, well, that's directly related to the topic he's talking about. So why wouldn't he include that study in the slides he's showing here? Because that's the closest thing that he's gotten to this point that would even remotely resembling receipts for any of the claims that he's making. So it seems like it would be a very good idea that if you wanted to prove your claims correct, you would have added that study in these slides. But he chose not to do that. I don't know if that was intentional or not. I'm not going to accuse him of lying. I'm not going to do that, right? I mean, he's a doctor. He's at a podium. He's legit. I'm not going to say that, like, oh, he's lying. He's being malicious. I'm not going to say that. I just don't know why he wouldn't include that study and why he wouldn't give the details of the study if he felt the need to bring it up. But okay.
So implicated in things like Parkinson's disease. They actually found that lectins can actually track up the vagus nerve and get into the substantia nigra and damage your cells there, and are implicated and thought to be part of Parkinson's, or at least a contributing factor to Parkinson's. Demonstrating this, there was a study in 2015 out of Denmark where they looked at all the people who had a vagotomy, where they cut the vagus nerve between the 1970s and the 1990s, sort of mid, and they found that in this population there was a 67% reduction in Parkinson's rates. Interesting.
So just removing lectins. So you can reduce Parkinson's rates by 67% just by removing lectins. Now, removing them how? Cooking the foods with the lectins? Or what? Seems kind of important to know, right? So what does the diet look like? Because when you cook a food, you remove the lectins. So is it removing 100% all trace elements of the lectins? Removing most of the lectins? What's the deal here? Right? So he talked about Parkinson's disease, which is a nerve disorder. Now, is he going to get into the details of what are the primary drivers of Parkinson's? Or is he just going to because what's the inference? Is it just that, hey, nobody would have Parkinson's, but the reason why people have Parkinson's is because of lectins? Is that the claim he's making, or what? Because, like, you run into this thing of correlation versus causation. So it seems like he's making a very loose correlative argument, but he's not. 67% is significant, right? But we would need to know, because cooking removes lectins. So when he says remove the lectins, you could just say, well, yeah, cooking. Is that what he means, or what? I don't know. He doesn't elaborate. All right, let's keep it
going on with lectins. There's wheat germ agglutinin, which is, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. This is another lectin. This can bind to the carbohydrate surface antigens on your enterocytes in your intestinal lining, and this can damage them. It can destroy them. It will also destroy these tight junctions where these cells are literally stuck together and giving barrier protection against things getting in your body that aren't supposed to get in your body. So when you damage those tight junctions, now bacteria and other chemicals that would normally not get into your system, like lectins, will now get into your system and cause all sorts of problems, like binding to your insulin receptors. Lipopolysaccharides are coming from bacteria, can also bind the toll-like receptors, and this causes an inflammatory cascade. And they can also, through molecular mimicry, is now implicated in autoimmune diseases. So these lectins obviously are foreign agents.
Molecular mimicry. I want y'all to remember that term, because later on in the video we're going to come back to that term, because he brings up molecular mimicry when it suits his argument. Let's see another time where molecular mimicry causes an influence on your hormones, and let's see if he applies that same reasoning. Just keep that in mind. Molecular mimicry. As far as what he's saying about bread, it really depends on the type of bread and how much it's been processed and whether or not you have celiac disease, right? So I'm not a big fan of putting wheat in people's diet. I don't put bread and wheat and things like that in people's diets. Generally speaking, the diet plans that I tend to create are very allergen friendly, because I really prioritize anti-inflammatory agents in a diet plan, right? So generally all of the foods that I'll put in a diet plan are anti-inflammatory, right? So he's kind of right about that. But again, notice the language he's using. He's explaining the biological mechanisms of how certain elements and chemical compounds affect certain parts of your body. That goes back to what I was saying before about biochemistry and looking at something in a test tube. He's correct in the test tube sense, but when you apply this to diet, it doesn't really exactly work that way. Essentially, the reasoning he's using, it's a fallacy. Well, it hinges on a fallacy called a leap of logic. If this, then that, right? And it's this automatic assumption of a premise that isn't true. Now, he could prove the premise to be true, but in order for him to do that, he would need statistical data, which he has not given yet.
Agents, they get into your body, and your body doesn't like that, and so it attacks them with antibodies. Some people, the genetically susceptible, sometimes they have surface antigens that look similar to these lectins and other foreign objects, and so now there's a spillover effect of these antibodies that now attack.
Good night, Donnan. I know we burning the midnight oil here. I'm gonna wrap this up in a few minutes here with this video, but I think you should be able to watch it on the replay here, and I'll put the link in the Discord. Night. All right.
Your normal cells, and this can be demonstrated as far back as the 1800s with Dr. J.H. Salisbury, for whom the Salisbury steak was named after, who did a 30-year research project into optimal nutrition for human beings and wrote an entire book called The Relation Between Alimentation and Disease, basically saying the relationship between disease and what you eat, which is my entire argument. This has been made before, and he found that this was long before processed sugar, that he found that people that stopped eating plants, just ate a pure meat and water diet, really you advocated red meat and water, were reversing things like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis. This was a century before we had any significant medications that would help. This was devastating when you got this. And he found that people would reverse it. People today are doing this all over the world. People may know of Jordan Peterson, his daughter Michaela Peterson, who had such severe juvenile rheumatoid arthritis that she had 2 joint replacements of her ankle and I believe her hip when she was 16 years old. She she went keto first and eliminated out a lot of different toxins and nightshades in particular, and had very, very good results. Then she dropped all the salads as well, just went to pure meat and water diet. Now she's off all medications and she's having kids, and she's healthy. She has not had a single flare-up. She had salad once, and that gave her a flare-up. And she's like, right, never doing that again, right? So that's...
So here's the interesting thing now. So he mentions Jordan Peterson. By the way, Jordan Peterson he's an amazing character. Jordan Peterson, I don't want to make this too much about him. Jordan Peterson is not exactly a reputable person. He's actually known to be a compulsive liar, and has drug abuse problems. Now, as a doctor, I'm probably not going to use that guy as evidence for the claims I'm making. I'm probably not going to do that. Jordan Peterson, he once made the claim that, he drank water with a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in it and put him in the hospital. Okay. Michaela Peterson, she's not that far off from her dad. She's a less controversial figure, right? But maybe this is true. Maybe she's severely allergic to salads. Maybe. I don't know, right? But I don't know that, let's say if I was a doctor, I wouldn't, as a doctor, saying, hey, there's this woman who does a podcast, and she stopped eating plants, and now she's extremely healthy. So therefore, you should stop eating plants. I don't know if I would do that as a doctor, right? It doesn't seem very responsible to me, right? And this is why statistical data is so important. Because I don't want to say, hey, this thing worked for this one person, therefore everyone should do it. It's not good math. And as a doctor, there's a certain level of risk that you take on when you do that, right? It's kind of like, hey, there once was a guy who won the lottery by playing the lottery. Therefore, every day, you should go get a lottery ticket and play the lottery. It's not really that sound, right? Now, when I say it that way and apply it to lottery tickets, you understand the ridiculousness of that statement, right? So this is why you need statistical data, which he has not given yet. Now, he started with carcinogens, which are cancerous. Now, this video could have been 2-3 minutes long. If he would have just provided that data, but he hasn't done that yet. So he's telling stories about Jordan Peterson and his daughter, and the stories are cool about koala bears and kangaroos and panda bears and Jordan Peterson. I mean, it's cool, right? But as a doctor, as a professional, right? It's a good idea to bring up some type of to show some statistical data that really solidifies the claims you're making. It's kind of odd that within 15 minutes and 45 seconds, he hasn't done that yet. I don't know what he's waiting for, but we're halfway through the video and he still hasn't produced that evidence yet.
It's, I think, very interesting as well. So you have these cyanogenic glycosides, and these exist in things like cassava root, which is a very important root, which we'll talk about. Also almonds and bitter almonds. They respond to damage. And so once you're chewing an almond or a bitter almond or cassava, that will release this cyanide. So it's normally not in the tissue, just when it's being damaged, right? So this is a defense mechanism. The cassava root, there's bitter and there's sweet. the sweet, or both of them combined, account for the third most important source of calories in the tropics, and is the primary source of calories for over 500 million people in the world. So this is a very important source of calories, and it contains cyanide. The bitter cassava will kill you if you eat it, the amount of cyanide that it has in it. So it has to be specially processed. And they grow the bitter cassava because if they have a problem with herbivores coming around eating their crops, well, they're not going to eat this one because it'll kill them, right? And so that has to be specially processed. But it doesn't get rid of all the cyanide in it. And so long-term exposure to even low-grade cyanide can cause serious thyroid and neurological damage, and quite seriously. And so we don't have that really as a staple here, but people do eat almonds, and people don't realize that 400 to 800 grams of almonds can be a lethal dose of cyanide in an adult.
So 400 to 800 grams of almonds. Okay. So let's do some math. 400 to 800 grams of almonds. Let's do some math here. Huh? This is probably like the last one I'm going to go through here because I'm getting a bit repetitive about the asking for statistical data and not saying it. So basically, if we go, well, I would say this because I'm not gonna. Let's say if we do this, we're gonna go to, because I don't want to take up too much time. This is probably going to be the last thing that I do. So let's say how many calories are in 400 grams of almonds. Okay, goodness. All right, so 400 grams of almonds is 2,312 calories. So which means that you would essentially have to eat nearly 2,500 calories of just almonds in order to get a lethal dose of almonds. All right, well, what if you just eat almonds like a normal person and maybe just have like a half a cup to a cup of almonds? Which is like, a half a cup of almonds is 300 and change, like 360 calories. A whole cup is like around 720, somewhere around there. Is that going to give you cyanide poisoning? And if so, does he have any type of statistical data that shows that among people who eat almonds, we're seeing increased cases of cyanide poisoning? Because I mean, again, we're going back to the statistical data thing. I'm gonna leave it there because we're already 17 minutes in. It's past 10 o'clock at night, and he's not producing any statistical data for any of these claims.
And yet we give this stuff to kids and sell them in grocery stores, which I think is wild.
So we give almonds to kids. So we're giving kids cyanide poisoning with almonds. So we should see cases of cyanide poisoning with giving almonds to kids, right? So we should see like a whole bunch of lawsuits and stuff like that with like, you know, cereals and cold cereals and things like that, and candy bars, breakfast bars with almonds in them, from kids eating them and getting cyanide poisoning, right? We should see that. Are we seeing that?
Right. And then there's bitter almonds, you know, which are just the inside of like a peach pit. And they're stone. You crack that open, it looks like a little shriveled up almond. That's very bitter because there's a lot of cyanide in it. And one or two of those, chewed up, crushed up, will release that cyanide, can be a lethal dose of cyanide in an adult.
So basically, if you chew and swallow a cherry pit, it'll kill you. With cyanide poisoning. So if we Google, I would be here with this forever. The problem with like the pseudoscience stuff is the fact that you'll be here all day. If it's like a 20-minute video, you'll be here for an hour fact checking and every claim they make. So let's see. You'd have to eat nearly 600 cherry pits to get a lethal dose of cyanide poisoning, because I actually Googled that last night. Cherries are pretty expensive, so I don't think you're going to be one to spend. I don't think anybody's going to be eating 600 cherries, let alone 600 cherry pits. and dying of cyanide poisoning. So when earlier in the stream I mentioned dosage. Dosage matters, right? So in order for something to have a negative effect on you and act as a poison, the dosage has to be high enough. Right? It's kind of like drinking too much water can kill you if you drink enough. That's not an argument to avoid drinking water, right? So the argument that he's giving is fallacious because, well, if you're eating a handful of cherries, you're eating a cup or something of cherries, you're not going to be getting cyanide poisoning from that. The dosage isn't high enough, and people who eat cherries, they don't eat the pits. Right? So he's saying a lot of things that are irrelevant because they don't apply to nutrition. It's a thing that exists in a petri dish. So the whole video goes on like this. I don't know if I'm going to go finish the whole thing. I don't know, maybe leave a comment if you want to have me do a review of the whole video, but you know, this is going on kind of long here. There's no statistical data given for any of these claims. He's kind of just giving a whole bunch of technical claims, but he's not providing any data for them. And about that bird, yeah, exactly. You know, so it's like, well, I mean, dude, you know, he's a doctor. I'd love to believe what he's saying. He's at a podium. He's wearing a suit jacket. He's got a lanyard. This guy's the real deal. But I need some receipts. I need some receipts. I need some dosages. I need those details, and he's not giving them. And we're gonna run out of time here. So, anyways, I'm gonna wrap this up. But I think this is a fun video. When I first heard it, it sounded very ridiculous to me. It was a little bit bizarre, and this kind of terrifies me because if I was a doctor, I'd be like, well, you know, you're kind of harming my profession with this stuff, because you delegitimize us as an institution when you get on a podium and you say this stuff, right? But anyways, not to be too long-winded there, I'll leave it there. This video is Dr. Anthony Chafee, Plants Are Trying to Kill You. So if you Google that, you can see the whole video there. You know what I mean? All right. That was brutal. Man, I'm like, man, I watched it by myself, and like a dork, I watched the whole thing all the way to the end. Last thing but not least, I know I mentioned the molecular mimicry thing, and that's because he brought up phytoestrogens. So he compared the mammalian estrogen in beef to the amount of phytoestrogens in soybeans, and he talked about phytoestrogens and mammalian estrogens as if they are the same thing, which leads me to believe that he doesn't know the difference between phytoestrogens and mammalian estrogens. Phytoestrogens block excess absorption of mammalian estrogens by engaging in that thing that he named earlier, known as molecular mimicry. So phytoestrogens attach to your cell receptors and they mimic mammalian estrogen, right? Which impedes the attachment of that mammalian estrogen to your cell receptors. He didn't mention that in the video, which leads me to believe that he probably doesn't know what phytoestrogens are, what they do, and the differences of phytoestrogen and mammalian estrogen. A lot of people make those mistakes, but you know, as a doctor, hey, we can't know everything, right? So I'm not going to be too hard on the guy, but a little bit of a fact check there. But yeah, I mean, we're like a little over halfway through that video. It's just really long. But if you want me to do the reaction videos, I'll do them, but they have to be for a shorter video. Because, I mean, he made a million claims. He didn't provide evidence for any of them, which is really brutal because it's not much for me to go over. Now, what I could do is I could say, well, this study shows that a whole food plant-based diet drops reduces the risk of all-cause mortality by at least 11% and upwards of 25 to 30%. I could show those studies, but the thing is I'll be doing that all day, and then it'll just be me reading research papers rather than watching his video. Also, when you make a claim, the burden of proof is on you, right? So if you make a claim like that, it's a very strong claim, like plants are trying to kill you, you should probably provide some type of statistical data for a claim like that. But in any case, I don't know, maybe the next video review I'll do, maybe the next guy will do something, will provide some receipts for the claims they make. But yeah, there really wasn't any evidence provided. But I'm a nerd. I'm very fascinated in looking at videos like that and kind of pulling them apart and doing the fact checking. But it's late. It's 10:21. It's way past, well, not quite really way past my bedtime, but it's getting there. So folks, thank you for tuning in to the first YouTube stream that I've done here. And I think I'm going to do these streams depending on how well this one does, and if you want me to do it again. I can either do it weekly or I can do it twice a month. So I'll send out an email to the email list, and I'll put a message in the Discord scheduling the next live stream that I do. And definitely leave comments and some feedback and let me know how you enjoyed the stream. I'll have it up for replay. And that's pretty much it. Last but not least, like the stream, and I got links in the description. You can book a call with me if you need help. If you want answers, you need a diet plan, right? I'll put links in the description to get started with that, as well as a link to join my newsletter so that you can get updates on when's the next time I do the next YouTube live stream and the TikTok live stream replays and things like that. So having said that, I'll see y'all guys on the next live stream, and stay vigilant, and have a good night. Talk to you soon.